Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibility Man. We're committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Our guest today is Dr. Eva Selhub. She is a board-certified physician and scientist. She's also an executive leadership and performance coach and consultant. Her areas of interest include wellness and resilience. She has taught at the Harvard Medical School and was a clinical professor at the Benson Institute for Mind-Body Medicine, where she once served as its medical director. She's the author of several books, including her latest, Burnout for Dummies. Dr. Eva, as she is affectionately called, is the founder of Resilience Experts. Her brand promise includes keeping people out of hospitals and fully engaged and thriving in life. Dr. Eva, welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Look, I'm looking forward to our conversation, but a reminder to our listeners and viewers, follow, like, share, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you find it. Your support matters. Dr. Eva, I love your book. I mean, there were many surprises here. It's well written and accessible, and you touch on topics I would never have dreamed of. So let me ask you, was that intentional or just, I mean, it touches on far more than burnout. Was that intentional or just a happy coincidence?
That's just how I roll. You know, for me, one of the problems actually for me, being in medicine and science before I actually left to do my own thing was that, you know, it tends to focus on one thing. And for me, nothing is separate. So everything to me is interconnected. So when I talk about health with people, that's why I talk about relationships and I talk about spirituality and what you eat and also drugs. I mean, it's everything. So everything is to me is interrelated. It's not, you know, I can't reduce it to one thing. So.
Gotcha. We're going to unpack some of what you just said there in a moment. So, but let's look at this title, Burnout for Dummies. Why this book and why now?
Well, so it's interesting because the Dummies folks, you know, the Wiley Publishing asked me to write this book, and they asked me to write the other book, which was Resilience for Dummies, which came out 2 years ago. And because I've been doing the resilience work for 20 some odd years, they said, we really want you to write these books. So they're written in a certain format. Dummies books are written in a certain format, you know, A to Z, and that you can open it up from any chapter. And so again, they came to me because resilience was a big issue. The pandemic had just started. Yeah. And, you know, people were talking about, we need to figure out how to be resilient in the face of this virus. And then, you know, fast forward a couple of years later, where as a result of the virus and all the other happenings in life, people were really burning out, and it's still happening to a certain extent. And because I was focusing a lot of my work in helping people burn out, they came to me and they said, will you write this book?
Yeah.
So yeah. It actually, they had actually started with a different author. They had asked a different person to write this book initially, and I, you know, I write that in my foreword. And so he actually did write the first couple chapters and just said, I don't have the bandwidth to do this. You know, he said, I don't have enough time. I don't have the bandwidth, and maybe I don't have the expertise. And so they said, well, let's find somebody who does, which is when they came to me.
Well, I said, well, I can't imagine them finding a better person to do it than you. So burnout is, you know, I get the burnout is a real thing. It's a real phenomenon, isn't it?
Yes, it's a real it's interesting to me because, you know, look, I started out as a primary care doctor 20 some odd years ago. And oh gosh, I left 20 years ago. So it's longer than that, 25 years ago. And, you know, people come to their primary care doctors with fatigue. They're just exhausted. And so we would see it as a medical person as a physical thing, but really burnout itself is actually a psychological term. So it's the physical part is there, but it's, you know, it was not like a diagnosis that we would come up with in a medical setting. We would just look for all the physical issues that would lead to somebody who was fatigued. But burnout itself is actually a psychological term where you just are profoundly fatigued, but it's also a state of withdrawal and depression, really, that you just don't have the wherewithal, the desire to engage in life and to engage in what you're doing. And you're feeling very negative and apathetic, and you just don't see a way out and don't see how you can keep going. You just don't want to do what you're doing anymore. So
Mhm.
it was first brought into light as a work phenomenon.
Okay, so it's a workplace phenomenon, but is it restricted to the workplace? That is,
No,
do only people who are employees experience burnout?
no, and that's the thing. That's why I
Mhm.
sort of opened it up with, as a medical doctor, we saw
Okay.
everybody come in with, and it happens to be a big phenomenon, especially in caregivers.
Uh-huh.
Right.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
whatever type of caregiving you are, whether you're a parent or whether you're caregiving for an elderly or a sick person or whatever that is, where you're giving, and then you just don't got much more to give. And
Yeah.
but you have to keep going, right? You either
Yeah.
have to keep going because you have to take care of this person, or you have to keep going because you have to make a living, or whatever that
Yeah.
is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so burnout is something that isn't just a work phenomenon, it's now a life phenomenon, given what we've been through the past few years.
Right. So now, can a person, you think, self-diagnose themselves? That is, if they're, someone is working today and the boss give them a hard time to come in and say, something, I'm just burnt out. Is that what it is? Or is it something that's more chronic, more persistent?
Well, it's kind of an interesting question, because I think in today's world, um, considering the kind of trauma that we've been through worldwide,
Mhm.
that maybe in the past we might have said it's more of a chronic thing that's been ongoing, but it can also be acute, right? You just have
Mm.
is the trauma is kind of continuing, and
Yeah.
until you don't have more gas in the tank,
Yeah.
or has it just been like this massive blowout trauma, like that you're dealing with something so catastrophic, that you just don't have anything left in the tank. So it's
Mhm.
kind of think about, like, I got no more gas in my tank, and what is
Yeah.
leading to that. So, and it's funny, because I remember when I was asked to write this book, I was sort of work with my workout partners, and we were working out and chatting, and I said, been asked to write this book, and my friend said, well, I'm burnt out, and I said, okay, but Mike, you're here really physically working out, and you've got lots of
Yeah.
energy, and you're smiling, and you're engaged, and you've got things that you're looking forward to. I said, so you might be feeling burnt out around your job. Um,
Mhm.
I said, but do you really feel like you don't want to work anymore, or do what you're doing anymore, or
Mhm.
keep going anymore? No, not really. So it's kind of was kind of laughing about being burnt out, because people are just kind of you don't feel like doing something.
Right.
But it's much
Yeah.
more profound than that, burnout.
Uh-huh.
So you could self-diagnose and say, I'm just burnt out, but you want to also look at, like, well, am I still feeling engaged in life? Am I still happy
Mhm.
about things? Do I still feel like motivated? Because if you're not feeling those ways, then you could self-diagnose and say, I'm
Mhm.
burnt out. And it wouldn't be, I'm just burnt out, because
Mhm.
just would be minimizing it.
Yeah. So an individual can have a situation where they may feel overwhelmed in that situation, but I get the impression in your book that, just because you have a situation of overwhelm, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are burnout. Is that?
That's right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So
Mhm.
again,
Mhm.
it's a combination of many different things that are sort of coming
Mhm.
together, that you're just, you don't want to do what you're doing. You don't want to
Yeah.
wake up in the morning. You're
Mhm.
withdrawing from the things you normally love to do.
Mhm.
You're withdrawing from the
Yeah.
people you love. You don't want to
Yeah.
engage. So
Mhm.
you just got nothing left.
Right. So it could happen to anyone. It could be a new mother who just feels, I just can't get out of bed this morning. I just can't change another diaper. Or it could happen to a law student or anyone, including an executive in a company. Is that what you're telling
That's
us?
right. Absolutely.
Mhm. Okay.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So you mentioned trauma in society, and COVID pandemic is the big one that you just cited. But what are some of the other things that people face today in our world? Is there something in the water that makes burnout so prevalent, or have you always been dealing with this kind of thing?
where can I get started? So, oh my gosh, I think it's so vast, the different aspects of what can lead to burnout. I think the first thing is to understand really the notion of resilience, right?
Mm,
That being human, it's never been easy. Let's just start with that. We live in an environment and in Mother Earth who's sometimes nurturing and sometimes harsh, right?
right.
I mean, we can look at this earthquake that just happened. It's devastating. I mean, that's a huge trauma. So,
Yeah.
however, it used to be that trauma would happen across the world, but we didn't know about it.
Mhm,
Now we know about everything that's happening all the time. Okay, so
mhm.
life has never been easy. Life has always been filled with stress. It's always been filled. We evolved, we didn't have roofs over our heads. We were wanderers. We went from one place to the next, and we oftentimes went without food.
Mhm.
So the traumas of being human have always been there. The way we perceived it was like we perceived it differently. We
Yeah.
perceived it, well, that's just the way it is. And we developed a resilience to it and said, well, I can handle this. So there's a sort of two faces to resilience, two sides.
Mhm.
I go through this hardship, this stress, and I learn how to overcome it. And I perceive it as it's there and that I have the ability to handle it. And eventually I get to a place where I flourish, right?
Mhm.
It's sort of when you
Mhm.
think of an athlete, they flourish through the stress and strain that they put themselves through and then they flourish. Or when we experience some type of hardship and we overcome it, we're like, yeah, I'm amazing.
Yeah.
We're still able to
Yeah.
engage in positive emotions and have relationships. And
Right.
then there's what this repeated trauma or stress over and over and over again. We keep getting knocked down and getting back up and knocked down and get back up.
Mm.
And that eventually leads to helplessness and hopelessness and burnout. We just don't have anything
Mhm.
left in the tank.
Yeah,
All
I
right.
see. Yeah.
So
What I
those
hear
are
you
sort of
say.
the facets of being human. And so
Uh-huh.
then we look at, well, what supports me to be resilient, to flourish,
Mhm.
and what detracts me from that. Okay, so if
Mhm.
we look at our ancestors, they had a belief system, they had a sense of connection, they had each other, they had nature, they only ate what was naturally available, they moved all the time. They had what we now call mind body medicine. We have to, provide research to somebody why you should exercise, as opposed to they just moved. They lifted
Mm.
things, they threw things, they walked, they ran, they slept when the lights went down because they didn't have, electronics. So the things that are also allowing us to live longer and better in many ways have also taken away from our natural tendencies to find support within our environment to help us thrive. And
Mhm.
so now we have to
Mhm.
tell people to meditate. We have to tell people to forge relationships. And we have to tell people to be mindful and tell people to exercise or tell
Mhm.
people to eat what's naturally available from the earth and not eat junk food. And so
Mm.
what happens is that there's all these physical, physiological, mental, spiritual, psychological measures that we used to have to support us to be resilient that no longer are being utilized as
Mm.
the culture that we are in now. We doubt everything. We don't have a strong connection to something greater than ourselves. We're not fully connected and we're disengaged from nature. The pandemic caused us to be disengaged from one another
Mm.
and that social connection. We are not regularly moving our bodies, especially if you're sitting in front of a computer and being active physically, not eating, nurturing and fuel rich foods. And then on top of that, you throw the stress of what's happening in the world, or being on the screen all the time and being connected all the time and not having breaks, not seeing what's happening around the world and feeling helpless about it, not feeling that we're in control. And then you throw work on top of that where you may not have a boss or leadership that's really supporting you to thrive and you don't feel in control and autonomous. So you throw all
Mhm.
that stuff in together and you have all this leaks of fuel without putting the fuel back in.
Yeah.
That's why you can't really
Yeah.
separate one thing from the other. It's all
I
interconnected.
got you. I got you. Gosh, it makes me wonder, is modernity a good thing or not so good thing? Because it's like things have always happened to humans, but now it's right in our faces. So what do you think? Is it a good thing or not so
Well,
good thing, or a combination of
well,
both?
first and foremost, I don't say good or bad, right?
Uh-huh.
Because then, if I would say it is bad, well, then what? I mean, we live in modern
Yeah.
society. What are we all going to go and live off the grid? Well, wouldn't that be great? So
Yes.
there are positives and there are negatives to living in modern society. The fact that you and I can have this conversation on
Mm.
Zoom is amazing. So
Yeah.
that we can feel connected in this way is truly amazing. So the negatives would be that people don't know when to disconnect off the computers. So it's
Mhm.
saying, well, what do I know? And how can I utilize what I know to bring the most value to my life?
Mhm. Mhm.
Right. So it's
Yeah.
taking a little bit of the old and a little bit of the new and merging it together to make it work.
Mhm. Yeah, I got you. This book surely establishes to me clearly what burnout is. There's no doubt about it. In addition to this, it seems to me, though, and tell me if this is a part of it, is that the more I learned about it, actually, the freer I felt. I felt better just by the knowledge of saying, oh, I understand. Is that what happens? That the more you know that maybe we haven't gotten to the tools yet, but just the more you know that you may get a freedom from that.
Well, absolutely. Part of anxiety and the feeling of hopelessness and hopelessness, and when I'm coaching these high level executives, by the way,
Mhm.
um, like much of their ability to improve both personally and professionally comes from being able to identify things.
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
a lot of the stress is that everything's out here and it hasn't been identified. And so the minute it's identified, they feel a semblance of control
Mm.
over their ability, or a locus of control, that I have the ability to now figure out what to do next. So a
Yeah.
lot of the overwhelm comes from everything being out here and not being actually put down in writing and to sort of format it in a way that says, oh, okay, now I know what to do, which is freeing,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I want people to know I really got a good feeling from this book. It's just amazing. But I want to ask you though, and there's some good news in addition to understanding this phenomenon, burnout. There's good news. There's good news here. And then one of them, you says, look, we have this innate wisdom in the body and the mind. What are you pointing to when you say that? I mean, that was spiritual to me. So, whoa, a scientist, a doctor, you say that? What are you pointing to?
Well, it actually is scientific.
Uh-huh.
So the beautiful thing is that when we were born, human
Mhm.
beings, before you have a brain that understands anything at all, right? Think about a baby. An infant has not much going on up there, right? They have something, but not much. It's like, I don't know, if I love witnessing these kids develop, because I can almost see their neurons and synapses being forming as they
Mhm.
start forming these pathways of understanding, of learning how to walk, or oh, what does this taste like? So before we have a brain that intellectualizes and understands things, we have a brain that is synthesizing our senses, and the senses are then informing our brain of how to then evolve.
Mhm.
Okay, so it's a feedback. So babies feel things and they sense things and they don't know what they are yet, but then it gets into the brain and the brain starts then forming synapses based on those senses.
Mhm.
So your body is sentient, it feels, and it informs the brain through the senses, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your sensory perceptors on your skin, what have you. And so if you pay attention to what the body's actually telling the brain, then you would actually probably make different decisions. But what happens is we bypass those sensors and we just go automatically into old behaviors and old thoughts and old reactions. And your emotions will sort of guide you in that way, your emotional
Mhm.
memories.
Mhm.
And so if we took a moment to just stop and pause and pay attention to the body and what it's trying to let us know through our senses, and you have another sense, which is your intuition, when you just know something, right? We have secondary brains throughout the body that are informing us, like the butterflies in your stomach, that are informing the
Mhm.
brain when you're in need of something. So your
Ah.
senses are there to let you know when you're in need. That's part of the stress response. That's how we're able to adapt and survive. It's letting you know when you're hungry and letting you know when you're cold. and letting you know when you're running on empty, and letting you know when you need some love, and letting you know when you need a hug, and letting you know all those things. But what happens is we don't pay attention.
Hmm. Is this like biofeedback, that we get it through our senses, that we know, even though we may not acknowledge that we know?
Well, it's many times our body will know. You'll, like, for instance,
Hmm.
your body knows when you're tired, but we drink caffeine instead.
Yeah,
Do we
I got
listen to
you.
the fact that we're tired? Maybe, but we don't go take a nap, or we don't try to get more sleep later. We just drink caffeine.
Mhm. Hmm.
Okay. Your body lets you know when it needs to move. It might start
Yeah,
feeling achy or stiff, but we keep sitting.
yeah,
We don't want to
yeah.
move. The body lets you know when you're feeling, like, that you need some love.
Hmm.
So what do is you deny yourself that, and you go and you push yourself harder, or you work harder, and you don't go out socially, whatever. And then when somebody does something and it, cuts you off in traffic, you get really pissed off because you feel like invisible. But yet you've
Mhm.
been causing yourself to be invisible all day.
Mhm.
But your body
Mhm.
has been saying. So when you take a moment, and a lot of the techniques in the book are about mindfulness and self-compassion, about learning how to be quiet and listening to the messages that your internal self is trying to tell you. Am I feeling, irritable because I'm hungry? Am I feeling irritable because I'm tired? Am I feeling irritable because somebody triggered an old belief system of not feeling enough?
Mhm.
Of a belief system that, of self-criticism that I learned when I was a child. So the book
Mhm.
walks you through that, of how to start learning how to pay attention to what it is your body and your inner self is trying to say.
Mhm. It seems, and correct me if this is not scientific fact, but it seems easier for people to gravitate toward the negative voice in the head or a negative memory than a positive memory. Does
Mhm.
that seem to be true, or is
Very
it
true. Well, it's
uh,
life-saving. Okay, so again,
life-saving? Mhm.
well, think about our ancestors. They were, hunters and gatherers, and they were often, somebody else's prey.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
So for them to just sit back and think about things positively, as opposed to being alert, so their brain is going to pull the negative stuff to keep them in line, right?
Mhm.
So to keep them in line as a social infrastructure, and not to hurt their fellow human because they needed each other,
Mhm.
but also to be aware of a predator that might be coming forward, and not to think this predator would be somehow nice.
Mhm.
So we have an inner critic that is meant to keep us in line, keep us in line as far as a social infrastructure. But the problem is that we've then interpreted that inner critic as being bad versus a behavior being bad.
Ah, okay. All right. So now, I get this impression once again from your book. I'm looking at page 7, because this was my first clue that, oh, this book is also spiritual. And it's like a knowing. Let me see if I can find it. You said, if you notice an uneasy feeling, who is the one that's noticing something to that effect? Walk us through that. What are you getting at? Where is this knowing coming from? And
Well, who is the I am?
what does that mean?
Well, who is the I? Right? I am the observer.
Right.
So when
Okay.
I'm in the I'm not in the I am not,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? If I am, right, we look at outside of ourselves for who we should be and who we should not be. So the minute you start observing, you're in the I, you're in the now, as opposed to outside of the now,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
So if you think of I, if I am here
Mhm.
inside and I'm observing, right? I'm in the present moment, and
Yeah.
I'm seeing, I am I am observing you, I'm observing the light, I'm observing this, I am observing,
Mhm.
as opposed to something is happening to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it because you say further on, and I'm going to read this. You said, who picked up this book, wanting to feel better? This book comes across your desk, you look at it, you pick it up, you know that there's something in, and you're saying that knowing is who you really are. Is that what you're suggesting to us?
Yeah, yeah. The knowing
Mhm.
is the knowing that I exist,
Mhm.
and therefore I am. So we try to figure out who we are, again, by external measures. I'm
Right.
nice, I'm kind, I'm a doctor, I'm a nurse, I'm a teacher, we try to define ourselves to figure out who we are,
Yeah.
as opposed to I
Yeah.
am because I exist.
Yeah.
If I exist, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Right?
I found something that's secure. It was, for me, it was like a secure thought, is that there is this knowing, and don't ignore that, that knowing is something deeper than just what's going on around you. One impression. The other thing that caught me, that really points me to a spiritual dimension of this book, is that you're saying, don't just look at a thing like, I'm burnt out. It's like, let me see if I can read it. You say, you are not those things.
That's
You
right.
are not your burnout. So
But that's
again, it goes back to who am I? If I'm not that, who am
that's
I?
the point. You have feelings, you are not
Uh,
your feelings. You're
uh-huh.
experiencing burnout, you are not burnout. That's why I'm saying I exist, therefore I am, and everything else then is an experience that I'm having as a human being.
Mhm.
So I experience emotions, I am not my emotions. I experience thoughts, I am not my thoughts.
Mhm.
I experience, myself as being angry. I experience the experience of teaching, but that's why teaching is what I do. It's not who I am. I'm a human being, not a human doing.
Yeah, I love you that you said this in the book as well. You illustrate that. That's great. So just to put this in a way that I can package it. So we got the phenomenon, burnout, which includes trauma and all kinds of other things. In addition to this, the good news is, know who you are. You're more than those things. And then, it seems to me that you give me some things that I can do. One thing in a book about burnout is, so you said it earlier, learn how to eat good food. Tell us about that. Well, people would think, well, look, all food is food, but
Well, let's take away. Okay, let's take away the good part. I didn't say good.
okay,
Remember, we don't say good or bad. Okay,
okay.
we want, because good or bad is actually a bit lazy, right?
Huh.
It judges things and puts them in categories as opposed to actually explaining what it is we really need and want and prefer. Okay, so what is it that the body needs? The body needs fuel. Now, would you put vegetable oil in your car?
No.
Okay, why?
Well, the car, it would harm the car.
But we do that with our bodies. We put in processed foods and chemicals and all kinds of stuff in our body. Don't we think it's going to burn out the body?
Well, see, most people don't have the knowledge that that would happen, but I'm dancing with you
But
though.
my point
Yeah.
is, that's the case. We want to put in nutrient-rich food into the body.
Gotcha.
Nutrient-rich
Yeah.
is the key. I don't even like to use the word healthy because what does that mean? Right?
Mm.
Nutrient-rich, right? Because it's describing, we want to start describing the specifics. And again, I do this with the people I'm coaching all the time. They say, "Oh, well, this happened." And so, well, let's talk about the specifics. What exactly do you want? What exactly are you trying to say? So nutrient rich fuel.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? It means trying to get 30 different types of plant-based foods into your diet on a regular basis, which is, whole grains and fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, those things, and fermented foods, improving the microbiome, those friendly bacteria that help your gut thrive, because that's going to help your brain and it's going to help the rest of your body. And when you feel stronger and better, you have the belief system that you are better able to handle the challenges that come your way.
Yeah. Simple enough. I like it. You want to feel better, put better fuel into your body is one thing that you can do. But speaking of nutritious food, let me ask you, did we do better as a world culture with foods, the type of foods we consumed before 1950? Or have you always faced this notion of foods that are, may not be as nutritiously of value to us? I mean,
Well,
that is, have the food system changed since 1950?
oh, sure. Sure. I mean, with the industrialization has absolutely changed the food system. Refrigeration and preservatives, the things that keep things, the preservatives and the sulfates and sulfites are all the chemicals that they've utilized to keep things on shelves and packaged. So, we do look at traditional diets, whether it's Mediterranean diet or, Eastern diets or that sort of thing, where people eat traditional food and what's naturally available. And also the way we used to eat was we didn't have fast food and we ate together as families. And, eating was a social thing that helped us all stay together. So it's not even just what we eat, it's how we eat that's also changed.
I see. Yeah. One thing to do, then eat nutritious food. A second thing you tell us to do, let me see if I get this right, movement. Did I get that right? Movement. Why is that
Body.
important? Yeah. Why
Move
is
your
that important?
body.
And move your body. Okay. Yeah.
Your body is meant to move. And if you don't move it, you lose it. So literally the motor neurons that move from your muscles to your brain and keep your brain smarter. And so if you don't use those muscles, those motor neurons are going to go back to the brain neurons. The brain neurons are just going to flake away. So if you want to age more quickly and lose your brain, that's a good way of doing it, is by not moving. So you're meant to move. So find a way that moving works for you. You don't need to go to the gym and do something you don't enjoy. Do something you enjoy. Go for walks. Find people you like to go for walks with. Go dancing. Learn functional movements, which are picking up things and lifting things up. It could be your groceries. It could be, taking a class. It could mean going hiking. It could mean a lot of different things. But certainly, if you're sitting on your bum all day, get up and you move around every so often and give the body an opportunity to engage in movement.
I like that better than the word exercise, because exercise seems like a chore, but movement, well, if we
Yeah,
can do it. Yeah.
exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So a third thing, I'm just trying to enumerate, what I got from what can I do, nutritionally rich foods, body movement. And number three, once again, I don't hate to say that I'm surprised. I was surprised to see it in your book, though. But compassion, and I'll add self-compassion and forgiveness, shows up in Burnout for Dummies. Why is that? Why is that important?
I have to say that it's the major theme of the book. So
Wow.
the major theme of the book, and you'll see it run through the entire book, is compassion and forgiveness and self-love. Actually, my first book was called The Love Response, FYI. The first book I was out in 2009. And it was about how you can shift out of the physiology of stress through the physiology of love. And at the core of our existence as human beings, and what drives the stress response, is the fear of not having or being enough. Right? So if there's a fear that's driving you of not having or being enough, it's going to override everything else, which means you're going to get closer to burnout. Right? So if we can shift that into a belief that I am enough and I have enough, I am loved, I am worthy, I am supported, I am taken care of, then we can actually shift that perception. And so, that's going to involve finding support and changing things in your life that are real, that can be more supportive and help you feel more enough in that way. But the other piece is your own belief system. And so we tend to be our harshest critics. We put ourselves down and deplete ourselves and tell ourselves that we're bad or not enough all the time. Even if I tell people just to pay attention to how often you should on yourself. I shouldn't be doing this. I shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
And that is literally depleting your gas tank. And so
Yeah.
the first and foremost is understanding that you're human and that you haven't done anything wrong. You're doing what you thought was best or the way you were programmed and what you were taught. And if you want to start putting fuel back in your tank, you want to start with self-compassion and treating yourself like you would your best friend, and knowing that you are human and that pretty much everyone else is feeling the same way.
Wow. Dr. Eva, that's absolutely beautiful. I got a message from one of my social media connections, I think it was this morning. And in it, he, was reminding his contacts that we are all sinners and somebody died for us. And I wondered, I knew it was a positive message. I thanked him, but I wondered, that messaging, is that good for us? I mean, I don't know. Is that a good messaging for people to say, we are bad, and I just don't, I'm not sure. How do you evaluate that?
So I think, look, I think this is a loaded question because only because millions and millions of people believe in the sort of the Judeo-Christian culture, which, believes in that notion of the original sin and that we're sinners and that sort of thing. And so, I don't want to negate people's belief system. I just want to say in my belief system, I don't believe in the notion of sinning. I do believe in, behavior that is bad or hurtful or, negative or whatever you want to call it, in that we don't want to condone negative behavior or hurtful behavior. However, my belief system is that we truly are divine beings here for a human experience. And in that human experience, we tend to forget and we think we're separate from that divinity. And when we believe we're separate from divinity, it creates suffering. And when we suffer, we act on that suffering and it leads to behavior that hurts others and is interpreted as a sin. But how can you call something sinful or someone a sinner when the problem is that they forget that they're divine, that they're connected to God, or that they are part of God, or whatever you want to call it divine or spirit or whatever, that forget that we're one. And it's a separation that creates suffering. And then the suffering that creates the erroneous behavior. So again, if I call myself a sinner, then I'm enhancing the sense of separateness. But if I have compassion for my behavior and connect myself with that divinity, the likelihood is that negative behavior will not happen again.
I appreciate that response, Dr. Selhub. That's great. So it seems to me, I'm a human being, and I'm going to say, it just seems to me that with human beings, that self-compassion is a difficult thing. Why is that? If that's true, I'm not saying it's true, huh?
It is very true. I think I wrote about it in the book. It's really hard because we think it's being selfish. Right? We think that, well, again, we're also so indoctrinated to feel like we're sinners. So if I have self-compassion, then I might do that bad thing again. If I forgive myself, then I'll do that bad thing again because I'm inherently bad. Right? You see how it goes around in circles?
Yeah.
As opposed to understanding that I am human and I'm going to make mistakes and I'm inherently flawed.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make me bad. It just makes me human. So what I need to remember that when a child makes a mistake, do I beat him up and say, you're horrible? You're a terrible human being? Do I do that to my best friend?
Mhm.
So it's really, really thinking, just think hard. How would I treat my dearest friend who's suffering, or a child that I love who's suffering? Would I speak to them in this way?
Yeah, I love it. I was reading this book last night and I left my desk and I just had the feeling, I probably chanted it. That was then, this is now. It's like self-compassion and also forgiveness. Why is forgiveness so important though? Why is that? And some of the spiritual traditions have it right. Forgive. Why is that so important to humans?
Well, again, if we hold on to anger, how does that feel?
Oh, toxic.
It feels toxic. It is. And it creates a separation from me and you and me and something greater. It literally feels like a block that keeps you separate, right? And then what happens when I forgive? What happens when I forgive? It lightens up. It's a reminding that we're all human, we're all in this together, and allows to that alignment of that connection to others and to spirit or source or divine, God, whatever you want to call it, to nature. It helps us remember that we are all indeed in this together and as one. And so it's probably one of the most challenging and difficult things to do, is to move towards forgiveness. And you can't do that until you have self-compassion. Because as long as you're not feeling connected and heard and seen and loved, you can't move towards forgiveness for yourself or for others. And again, you're not condoning behavior.
Right.
You're
Right.
forgiving because that person is human and they're suffering. Or you're forgiving yourself because you're human and you're suffering, not because the behavior was okay.
Right. It's incredible. And I'm telling you, just reading those kinds of things in this book, I felt a relief. I mean, it's something just like released to me. There's one other strategy, there are other strategies, but there's one other that I want you to chat with me about that appears in your book, and that is mindfulness. Twofold question: what do you mean by that? And how does a person know that they are living in that way?
Well, so let's go back. Let's step back to the mindfulness is defined non-judgmental, moment to moment awareness. Okay. So that means that you're not thinking, right? You're just here in the moment, in the now, without judgment, aware, moment to moment. So it's not so much that you know whether or not you're living that way. It's just taking time to be in the present moment, and then you'll notice when you're not that way. Right? So mindfulness is sort of like when you breathe, right? And you inhale and then you follow the exhale. You're not really thinking about whether or not you're going to inhale or exhale again. You're just in the moment to moment of the breath. Inhale, then exhale, then inhale, then exhale, then inhale, then exhale. But you're not sort of anticipating whether or not you're going to have another breath. And you're not looking behind you to think what your breath was like yesterday or 2 seconds ago. You're just inherently going into the next breath. You're not thinking about yesterday and you're not thinking about tomorrow. You're not thinking at all. You're just breathing. Okay, so that's the experience of being human. However, we think about stuff. We think about constantly thinking about yesterday or project into tomorrow. We anticipate how we're going to feel or how things is going to be. We're judging something as good or bad. And every time we do that, we get out of the present moment. And so mindfulness is about moment to moment awareness without judgment.
Huh.
When you do that, you disengage from the emotional experience, you disengage from the judgment, you disengage from the labeling, you turn off the stress response, and you can get into a positive emotional state of being in the
Mm.
now.
Mm. So if I visit a lake and I can hear the water, I can see the water, and I'm simply having that experience, being with that water, that, that's something that's good for me. I can call it
Absolutely.
mindful.
So,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
there is, so there's, it's what we call, and you remember I said, we're born sentient beings. We're born
mhm,
using our senses. So mindfulness is the experience of engaging the senses in the moment to moment experience. You're not
yeah,
thinking, you're engaging the senses. Remember, you were not born thinking, you were born engaging senses.
yeah,
So we're going back to the experience of engaging senses. And a beautiful way of doing that is going out in nature.
yeah.
And there's a wonderful studies that they've done in Japan. It's called Shinrin Yoku forest bathing, where you basically walk through the forest, bathing your senses. That's what Shinrin Yoku means, bathing your senses,
Mm,
immersing your senses in the experience, noticing what you see, what you hear, what you feel, what you experience without judgment. You're walking aimlessly and you're just experiencing and being in
mhm,
that present moment. And that has been found to not only decrease stress, but improve your immune system, improve the
mm,
energy of your brain, and it lasts. It continues working for months later. So, yes, taking mindful walks out in nature or experience out in nature are
yeah,
very, very good for you.
mhm. For those individuals who may be fans of Star Trek, well, I was surprised to see it in it. I'll just use the quote. I'm not sure if you remember this or not, but you quoted something from a Star Trek episode. Resistance is futile. Do you recall that? And what were you getting at?
Well, that's the whole point,
Uh-huh.
right? So imagine, you're sort of trying to constantly push upstream, trying to always, and you're resisting, you're resisting, you're resisting, and you're resisting. It's exhausting. And it's futile because you're not going to get anywhere.
Mm,
As opposed to surrendering and being present and just being pushed, you're going to find freedom. You find flow.
mm,
The resistance
yeah,
is futile. So trying to resist yourself or resist this or resist that, it's just going to cause you to be stagnant.
right. And this book certainly shows us that flow and freedom is possible. Dr. Eva, is there anything else you want to share with us that I have not asked you about today?
I think we've covered quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. And I tell you, and just your work and you're a scientist, it kind of reminded me of some of the philosophers of old, Voltaire and
Hmm.
Rousseau, they try to understand the nature of life. And thank you for helping us understand life and how we can be in life in a way that's good for us. So I really appreciate having you
Thank
today.
you. That's the kindest words. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, with that, you've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. Our guest today has been Dr. Eva Selhub. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton. Until next time, good day